Today on the show, we have William Glass. William Glass is the CEO and co-founder of Ostrich and host of the Silicon Alley podcast. His mission is to improve global financial well-being. Prior to starting Ostrich, William worked at an AI market research company in New York City. Additionally, William led sales teams at Gartner Research, where they worked with the leadership teams of tech startups from pre-revenue to $250 million in revenue. In 2014, William was awarded a Fulbright scholarship where he taught English in rural Thailand for 14 months. William is originally from Alabama, graduated from Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida, and now resides in New York City. William, so great to have you here on the show today, and happy Pi Day to you.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Shad. Yeah. Happy Pi Day. We're recording this on March 14th. So it's a special day.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so glad that we were able to sync up. So for the audience's context, Will and I, we met on a online podcasting community called Matchmaker. I feel like a broken record now saying that because that's where I meet a lot of my guests. But, you know, for when I met William and learned about his story and his platform with Ostrich, I was just immediately drawn and wanted to chat with you more about kind of what your life looked like growing up when it came from a personal finances standpoint, just because I remember that day when I first reached out. Like many people, I'm on YouTube and just searching up these finance related videos, going down into personal finance. And then I thought, you know, as a huge proponent for health and wellness, I thought, you know, finance is always thought of as a very cookie cutter kind of mathematics, kind of logical oriented kind of endeavor that people undertake. And that's where a lot of confusion comes about when it comes to finance. And so I thought, you know, is there this idea of financial well-being out there? You know, is there a more holistic approach to approaching one's finances? And so when I saw that Will, you know, has basically built up a platform around this idea of financial well-being and, you know, approaching it from a different angle and lens than typical financial advisors do, I immediately knew I had to kind of chat with Will and learn about his experience in the platform with Ostrich and everything. And I think I can speak for Will also. Like we want to make sure anything that we're discussing here isn't misconstrued as like financial advice either. This is just really more so about our experiences and Will's experiences growing up and, you know, what he's learned as a result of his platform with Ostrich. And so today, just wanting to learn a little bit more about financial well-being. And so I guess kind of a good place to start is kind of learning about your upbringing, Will, in terms of, you know, growing up in Alabama with your family, living abroad, and now kind of coming to New York City. You know, what was your experience like and perception of money as you made these different transitions, you know, from, you know, being a child? I know you were a child actor into, you know, a teenager and now a young adult, you know, experiencing the world on your own.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the intro, Shad. And so happy to dive in. So as you mentioned, it kind of started with the acting bit. So my mom's side of the family, they're all in entertainment. Grandfather was a comedian, toured around the country, was on TV shows. Grandmother, big band singer. Uncle in the music business, started the first rap label, Party Records, and brought West Coast music. Other uncle was part of the Chicago Public Radio, brought This American Life, which is one of the first kind of known radio shows and podcasts, so to speak, that really took off. So I was in that entertainment world. And when I was probably about 10 years old, I ended up booking a commercial for Cracker Barrel, which for those who don't know, Cracker Barrel is like a Southern food restaurant all throughout kind of the South, and they've spread out, but mostly in the South. And it was a 2-day shoot and I made $2,700. And obviously the 10-year-old kid, I didn't understand what that meant. Like I just got out of school and like people were like telling me to go places and pretend to eat food and like do stuff. And like, I was just having fun. But my dad was talking about just like how incredible that is. Like in 2 days as a 10-year-old, you made $2,700. There's people that don't make that in a month, right? Especially this was in, you know, early 2000s. And so I started to, that idea of leveraging time and separating out time and money was kind of implanted in my mind. And that's kind of where it started to take route. And then, you know, as I grew up, my parents ended up getting divorced because of money. They didn't have the same philosophy, didn't have communication. And so when I think about like financial literacy, that's that's again another sort of experience that I had, and started to examine my own relationship with money, going really in depth and reading books like Rich Dad Poor Dad and all these other kind of financial literacy type
Hmm.
type books. And that's kind of where my interest in finance started, and personally, it affected me. I saw the power of being able to leverage your time in a way where you can earn a lot of money for something that seems really fun, doing an acting job, as well as the negative side of that, of what can happen if you don't have strong financial communication with my
Mm-hmm.
parents. And ultimately, in 2008, when the housing bubble burst, their relationship burst along with it.
Yeah, definitely. You can kind of see like you mentioned, the significant impact that finances and your relationship to money at large can have on your life. Kind of going back to the child acting experience. I know that there's a lot of stories you hear about when kids get into acting and then they realize, oh, all this money I'm bringing in, and as a kid, you never have really any sort of idea of what money means. But when you grow up and then adults start telling you, yo, you're making this much money. Like, you're not, there's a lot of people who don't make this kind of money out in the real world. And then you kind of get really sabotaged into this lifestyle and you don't know how to manage it. You don't necessarily know how to, center your life in a balanced, well lifestyle, because money comes in, money goes out. And then similarly, when it comes to relationships, not having that same mindset, that same philosophy, like you were mentioning with your parents, it's a huge source of, it can bring you together, but it can also pull you apart, like you were mentioning. And so that's kind of the
Yeah.
root of where I think a lot of us as individuals need to really gain a better understanding of what does our relationship look like money. Can we develop this well lifestyle around money? And so I'm curious. There's kind of two camps I've seen throughout my time when it comes to managing money. You either don't have any sort of financial background, you don't understand how to manage your finances, and you end up getting into some sort of financial mess, and you feel as if it's an avalanche and you can't get out of it, and you have this wishful thought that everything is magically going to work out one day. Or you're on the other side of the camp, on the other side of the spectrum, where you feel as if you have to micromanage everything and you have to have like a stranglehold. Where is this 1 cent going? Oh, you bought bread for 2.99. I could have went next door and it got for 2.98. There's that other side of the spectrum. So I'm curious, when did you first come across the idea of financial well-being, and why do you think it's such a difficult concept for so many, I guess everyone at large across the world? Why do you think it's such a difficult concept for people to grasp?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so to answer that, after and as you mentioned in the intro, I ended up spending a year in Thailand through the State Department and the U.S. State Department teaching English. And I was in rural Thailand and around this community. It was very much an underserved, so to speak, community. It was kind of there's less than 1% of tourists ever went there. So it's the Isan region. It's near the Lao border in northern Thailand. And I got to see the impacts of like finances and just a different way to manage that. And some of the same challenges that I saw in the US with my parents and then with coworkers, which I'll get into here in a second, kind of hits on that point of there's these different camps of how people manage money. And so it's definitely a global problem. And when I came back from Thailand, I ended up at Gartner Research, and I was in sales there, led sales teams, and I would see folks that would hit, $20,000 bonus and go out and blow it on a brand new truck. And I knew they were in $80,000 worth of student loan debt, and
Mhm.
seeing this kind of, very short-term thinking, like I deserve this, I hit this goal, yet you just added even more debt to your already mounting debt. And at the same time, I saw folks that were in the financial independence retire early community, which is the FIRE movement. If folks
Mhm.
haven't heard it, you can look up what financial independence retire early. But that's more of the camp, Shad, that you talked about around the like save every penny.
Mhm.
And I
Yep.
saw someone that retired at the age of 34. So I got to see these nuances between people that were on either extreme. And I think sales is a really great place where you can see that when there's a lot of money coming in, and you see people that just throw it out the window, and then
Mhm.
others that are socking it away. And it was through this kind of my own introspection on my own relationship with money of finding that balance between wanting to save and plan for the future, but also, enjoy life now.
Hmm.
And that's where this concept of financial well-being came from, and was doing research and starting to understand that it goes beyond financial literacy or what you do with your money, but it's your feeling towards your finances and how satisfied you are. So there's a couple components, but one component being financial literacy is a prerequisite, but not a determinant of how satisfied you are with your financial situation. And so that's where I got really interested in financial well-being, and kind of the nugget for Ostrich, and what led us to starting Ostrich.
Yeah. So I'm curious, when you mentioned that idea that financial literacy is the precursor to financial well-being, but it isn't the determinant. I'm curious, throughout your time building out the Ostrich platform, or just generally maybe observing around, what do you feel as if is that next step, or that incremental, determining factor that really does take you from I'm financially in a secure spot to now I'm financially in a well-being state?
Yeah. So, yeah, when I say that financial literacy is a prerequisite, there is a point where you start to consume too much information and analysis paralysis takes over, or you start trying to learn concepts and topics that don't add value to your life, right? Do you really need to understand what a butterfly option spread is? Probably not, right? Like, who's doing that level of trading? Unless
Mhm.
that's really what you want to dedicate your full time, job to, and that's what you really want to be doing, then by all means jump into those types of strategies. But you do have to have a baseline, right? If you don't have a baseline of how money and finances work, you'll just never know the rules to the game. It's like trying to play Monopoly, but you don't know how, like, you don't know what you're supposed to do. Like, am I supposed to buy? Like, you
Mhm.
can't win, right? How can you win the game if you don't understand the rules? So financial literacy is getting that baseline of rules without going into the crazy nuances that you don't necessarily need, that would then take away from your life, because you're like, man, I can't figure out this butterfly option spread. But
Mhm.
you don't need that, right? Like,
Right.
that's not going to actually add value. So when it comes to well-being, I think what people really miss when we think about improving finances is that emotional component. And so that's what
Mhm.
I saw was missing when thinking about Ostrich, and what led to finding Ostrich is hitting that emotional side of money. Because there could be two people that are in the exact same financial situation, and someone may feel like they are way behind because they're comparing themselves to Elon Musk
Mhm. Yep.
versus, you know, someone that they know that is, really struggling, or in some sort of, situation where they're homeless or things like that. If you're comparing yourself to different people, that's going to affect how you feel. So there's all these emotions that we just don't talk about that really do dictate our well-being, how we feel about our finances, that goes beyond just the basic financial literacy and taking the right actions.
Yeah, definitely. I love that breaking out the emotional component, because I'm of the belief, and I'm curious to know of your perspective as well, that our
Yeah.
financial situations are more so a psychological mirror, a psychological reflection of ourselves. What is our belief system, more so than the actual kind of numerical type of, when you see a balance or whatever the case is. So I'm curious. As a result, I know, kind of going into Ostrich now, I know you have a lot of different challenges set up for individuals to get them first acclimated with the financial literacy component, but also, I guess, reinforcing some emotional psychological concepts. I'm curious, what have you found throughout your time building out Ostrich are some of the more common practices, common challenges that folks usually gravitate towards, regardless of where they're at in their financial journey, in order to help them achieve this state of financial well-being? I know, like, your challenges have these really nifty names. Like, I think you mentioned, like, your favorite one is probably like drop it like it's hot. One of the debt saving challenges. I'm curious, what challenges do you find most people gravitate towards, and do you find, as if, I don't know if you have any insights or data on it, like, how does that reinforce the psychological emotional component you were talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chad. And you mentioned something before you asked that question around the financial well-being piece, and it was specifically about how you feel, right? The
Mhm.
reflection of how you feel dictates, your well-being. And that's definitely true to some degree. So I just want to quickly address that. There's obviously, if you have no income or anything like that and you're in a ton of debt, there's a very different situation. But once you do have a
Mhm.
baseline, you're absolutely right that your own perception, how you feel about money and where you spend it reflects more of your, emotional state than it does necessarily where the balances are going to. So I think that's a really great point that you brought up, Shad, that I wanted to just quickly address. But going to Ostrich and the challenges that we see people gravitate toward, if you're first starting out, the no spending ones tend to be a lot of fun. So there's certain no spending ones. So one of them that really sticks out that we run every fall is called Frugal Fall, where folks pick one area of spending that they want to cut out and that they're not happy with. Could be online shopping. It could be, well, when we weren't in a pandemic, it was eating out, things like that. And that one's really fun because you can align it to something that you're already not happy about, right? So it's like, I know that I spend too much money on ice cream and I'm going to cut that out because that's going to add value. And again, you're starting to address the emotions that lead you to buy ice cream when you don't want to buy it, or online shop when you don't want to online shop. And so that's been really effective. And that's also a fun one to talk about. So one of the things that we do with Ostrich is make the challenges social. So that way you have this network of other people that are also working towards the same goals. They may not be trying to cut out online shopping, but they might be, cutting something else out. And there's that sort of group pride when people hit goals or when someone stumbles, being able to pull someone else up. And so it's that kind of the emotional piece is knowing that you're not alone and that there's other people that are also on the same journey that have the same challenges and that you have folks that you can turn to. Because, one of the biggest issues when it comes to finances is that people aren't comfortable talking about it, right? It's this taboo subject. And that again goes back into the emotions where people will feel shame if they go and spend money when they think that they shouldn't have done that. Or, they see someone else buy a brand new car and they're like, man, I should probably buy a brand new car. Why can't I afford that? And it becomes internal. And there's this sort of like shame that we associate with the things that we have, the size of our bank account or, a number on a screen.
Right. I think the key point there was the idea of shame, like you brought up. It's just the fact that when you look at your situation, and it's a result of being social beings that we are always comparing ourselves to other individuals and where they're at. But when you look at the grand scheme of things, people are at different points in their life journey. And I guess to take it a step back further, your life journey, your track isn't going to be the same as someone else. It's always going to be different. And the kind of the inputs that go into that with like income and kind of what you did throughout your life, financial decisions, they're always going to be different. So there's not a one-to-one comparison. And nor am I saying even if it is one-to-one, you should compare yourself. But I think that further reinforces the point, like you were mentioning, that you shouldn't compare yourself. And so I'm curious from your own journey and your experience, learning about personal finance. I've always thought that a good way to go about it is to kind of detach yourself from everyone else and just focus first internally on what is it that is most meaningful and significant to you. And then you take the step forward and then work in a community setting like with the Ostrich platform, and then lean into that vulnerability, that shaming component that people might feel and be like, hey, I know it might be tough, but I went through something very similar you went through. And, now you're going through one of these challenges with like the no spending challenge or the drop it like it's hot challenge, whatever the challenge may be. I'm curious, like when you were going through your own experience, was it kind of a similar idea or how did you go about it?
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Shad. It's thinking about your values, right? As you said, looking internally, what is it that I truly care about? Let me try to turn off, Instagram and all the things that it tells me that I should be buying or that I need to be successful, a fancy car, watch, whatever, new clothes, certain levels in video games, whatever it is. And like, what is it that I truly care about? And that's really hard. That's harder than you think it would. Than you think it would be, because there's just all these other influences. And we are a little bit of a product of, the culture that we grew up in, our parents, our friends, our families, society, which is okay. But you've got to filter through some of those things that have been pushed on you in terms of values and figure out what it is that you truly care about. And that's the hardest thing. But once you do that, then it becomes a lot easier to then prioritize your finances, because you're not just prioritizing your finances, you're prioritizing your life, what it is that you value. And this podcast talks a lot about relationships. So also who's in your life? What's the person that you want to be? And how do you want to have relationships with other people? And which ones do you want to strengthen and really lean into? So I think that, as you said, is absolutely crucial, is to really look internally And that allows you to get over the shame because now you know what you value. So you're not going to be shamed when someone makes a comment that your car is beat up and old because you maybe don't value cars. Or
Right.
maybe you do. And they say, why? I can't believe you live in that place. Like I could never live there. That's not going to bother you. You're not going to feel shame in that because what you do value, you have prioritized from a financial perspective and from a life perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's one of the key things and it doesn't even stem from just the financial component. I think just like you mentioned, this entire podcast at large, really understanding the values that you internally set for yourself and letting that dictate, in a sense, all of your decisions going forward. And then the commotion, the criticisms, the praise, whatever the case may be, they don't affect you because you've already done that inner work to be confident enough in the decisions you make, regardless of the kind of response you're getting from other individuals. So I think this is such a great exercise to do. And I think Ostrich is definitely helping people do that. And I think providing that community for people to do a little bit of that self-reflection work and, have a community to then go back to reinforce a lot of that self-reflection work. And so I'm a little bit curious when like you mentioned earlier, you were working, a full-time job as a sales agent, and then you went and became an entrepreneur. You left a steady salary. I'm kind of curious, what was going on through your mind emotion wise when it came to financial well-being? Because I'm sure that, for anyone who wants to make that kind of a transition, it's a scary transition. So I'm curious, was a lot of that self-work already done beforehand to then make that jump, or kind of what was going on through your mind?
Yeah, I think that work began, I don't know, decades before. It definitely wasn't like an overnight easy decision, like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I'm going to go do this. As a kid, this is kind of funny. I would always say that I didn't want a career because to me, career meant I'm going to be at the same company for 30, 40,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. I was like, I'd rather have a job. I don't want a career. And and now my relationships changed with that, but I understand looking back what I was really saying. And it was more of like, I want to be able to control my own destiny. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
entrepreneurship is the way to do that. But it was a long process. Like I have all these, have all the same kind of pre-programmings from society and people telling me or what I see of when is the right time to start a company. Am I able to do that? Do I have what it takes? All those like self-doubts played through my head for years. The idea for Ostrich started in 2017 when I wrote down kind of this manifesto, and I didn't look at it again for 3 months. And then I came back to it and then, would do some more work, talk to people about it, and then went away for another 4 months, got busy with work or whatever it was, and then come back to it. And this kind of like perpetual cycle of wanting to create something and solve this problem. It was on and off, right? Get distracted with work. And so eventually I ended up moving up to New York City to work for the market research, the AI startup. And it was once I got to New York that I reconnected with a friend from college who had started a company when he was in college and kind of had started to go the corporate route, went into private equity, and then ended up in investment banking. And he wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. We both kind of had that same drive, and that's how it started. But the decision to start Ostrich and move was partly financial. So during this whole time that I'm going back and forth, I'm saving money. I invested in real estate and rental property and a rental property. Like I'm doing these things that I need to do. But a lot of it was psychological, as well as having a financial cushion that I could live off savings for a while, knowing that there wasn't going to be any income.
Mm-hmm.
So it was definitely this process, but one that was both, I would say, more like pumping myself up and building confidence in myself, as well as having that financial cushion that I need to be able to go build a company, knowing that there's not going to be any revenue coming in for the foreseeable future. So that was my process, not a quick decision.
Yeah, I think that's like many people who want to make that sort of transition, or even the idea of starting something anew and, breaking away from traditional paths or traditional trajectories. And, that was the same kind of process I went through when even, starting this podcast. You always are so in your head, but then you realize if you, like you mentioned, you repetitively, build some practices, you do certain things to prepare yourself, and then you build in accountability factors into that decision making process. And then
Mhm.
once you start, you're off to the races at that point. So I think for a lot of people, when it comes to finances, but even at large, kind of broadening this out, take the steps like Will was mentioning, and that we've been talking about, where you do that self-reflection work, and then you're able to then reinforce that self-reflection work. And I think when it comes to personal finances, Ostrich does such a great job. I love the platform and all these challenges that are really helping people that don't know where to start. It's always such a
Yeah.
difficult, that's the most difficult part, I think, when it comes to finances. Where do you start? But once you start getting the snowball, it starts picking up some steam, gathering some more momentum. It's just, there's no end in sight. I mean, you're just like set up for so much success going on forward that you could have never imagined. It just takes that one little small step.
Yeah.
And so
You're
I'm
building habits. That's exactly what it is, right? It's
yep.
building those habits so that, the first time it's really hard, you're trying to figure out how to pay down debt or whatever situation you've gotten yourself in. And you just start taking those little steps and you build the habit. And once you build the habit, then that just, you don't have to think about it, and you can start working on other parts of your finances or something else in your life. But those habits is what's absolutely key. So that's how we structure the challenges, as you said, is really to focus on people that are just starting and want to build those strong habits. So I just wanted to point that out. You hit the nail on the head there.
No, yeah, I think that's the key, like you mentioned, the habits. And so, for individuals that are, kind of lost when it comes to their finances, definitely check out Ostrich. I think it's such a great platform to, like Will was mentioning earlier, kind of getting that precursor with getting the financial literacy from the forefront, but then also, them being able to emotionally and psychologically work your way through finances, and the platform in of itself, through the challenges, through the community, does help reinforce that component that pushes you toward a financially well state of mind. And so, Will, what I like to do at the end of each and every single one of my episodes is this segment I call the 3 keys to relationship. And so this is a segment where I ask guests 3 questions to kind of gauge their insights on relationship management. And these questions pertain to any and all relationships. So friends, family, romantic partners, business colleagues, what have you. And these aren't quick fire questions either. So I'm really curious to hear you expand on these. And so the first question is, what's your number one relationship red flag?
Yeah, so I love these questions. By the way, they really make you think. But mine is extreme criticism, and what I mean by extreme criticism is both in the context of someone putting blame on other people. So, for example, I've worked with someone that we thought was going to be a really big part of the company and ended up not being a big part of the company. And everything was someone else's fault. Someone was a moron, someone was an idiot, someone was dumb, someone was, and it was all derogatory, right? Like that, where it was just like so negative. And it was just this extreme criticism that there was no ability for them to take ownership. And so, I think that applies not just in a business relationship, but in any context, when there's so much criticism, extreme criticism, and about other people putting blame, that's a big red flag. But extreme criticism also goes the other way, where I've seen folks that have used it as a kind of a defense mechanism, where they're an idiot and they're
Mhm.
dumb. And so extreme criticism either on other people or internally is a really big red flag, because it shows that someone doesn't have a growth mindset, so to speak, right? They're not
Mhm.
open
Yep.
to criticism. They don't have the ability to take ownership of their own life, right? If it's in someone
Mhm.
else's the idiot or it's their problem, then you can't take ownership. Or if you are so negative that you aren't able to get out of your own head, and the reverse, where everything is your fault to a degree where you take no action, that is a huge, huge red flag.
Yeah, I love that. That something I think society and has been struggling with for such a long time. And there's so many different dynamics. You can go into a huge tangent with like the psychological component of workplace relationships, or your self-confidence and everything. But like you mentioned, it's a huge reflection of what type of mindset do you have. Is it a fixed mindset you have, or is it a growth mindset? And I think when you can make that transition, like you were mentioning, from a fixed, more critical mindset to a more growth oriented mindset, hey, I messed up here, or, I have to take ownership. I can learn from this and we will all progress forward, in a team setting, if you're working in a working environment, or if you're working on just yourself in personal projects, whatever the case may be, thinking like, hey, I messed up. Like there's plenty of times I've messed up, like on a podcast or, doing something on my own. But then I used to like beat myself up over it. But then I thought, no, wait, I'm growing, I'm developing, I'm learning new things every single day. And you start to get that ease and comfort and joy out of learning. Okay, I enjoy making these mistakes. And so you get out of that self-critical space, like you were mentioning, that is a huge red flag. So I love that you brought that point up.
Yeah, it's the extreme criticism where you're not able to take action, right? That's the underlying issue, is you're not able to take action because everything's someone else's fault, or it's your fault to a degree where you're not able to improve. So yeah, it's just, so important to pay attention to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it makes such a huge difference in your life. So I couldn't agree anymore. And so the second question I have is, what's the most kind of a converse, I guess, what's the most underrated relationship quality in your opinion then?
So I'm going to use the word criticism again, but I'm going to qualify it with loving criticism. And you could call it
Mm,
accountability, but I think that is one of the most undervalued thing in a relationship, is when you have a partner, a friend, a colleague, someone that genuinely cares about you and is making suggestions or corrections about things that you could do to improve, and from a loving place. That is one of the most underrated and undervalued assets in a relationship, because accountability, when I was leading sales team, was the number one thing that every sales rep said that they wanted, was more accountability.
mm,
Everyone said it across the floor. I said it to my manager, but I didn't want to be micromanaged, because micromanaged has a level of criticism in it, but it's not
yep.
coming from a place of care. And I think
Hmm.
accountability, loving, so I'm using the term loving criticism as well as kind of accountability, is one of the most important things. So if you can find friends, family members, whoever it is in your life, business partners or coworkers that have that kind of loving criticism where they truly, truly care about you and you getting better, then I think that is just absolutely important and will enrich your life to so many degrees.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy. I think you hit such a great point here, where it's such a nuance between loving criticism versus, I guess, in the working setting, a micromanager, or, a friend or someone who just kind of constantly nagging you or
Yeah.
berating you in a sense, instead of actually coming from a place of wanting you to develop, wanting you to grow, but not overstepping that kind of, from a more growth mindset to a more negative type of energy that they're trying to just emit for the sake of emitting it. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious, from your experience, how do you find that difference? Because oftentimes, sometimes and I think it might go back to that first question where you were saying having that overly critical mindset. Maybe it's you yourself being able to transition into a more loving kind of mindset, and then when you can do it internally for yourself, you can then do a more lovingly critical type of interaction with your other coworkers or your partner or your friends. I'm curious, how do you differentiate, how do you make that transition between that super negative critical, because sometimes what I find is people will be so lovingly critical for such a long time, but then someone, when they're trying to hold someone, like you're mentioning, accountable, I guess, kind of the equivalent of lovingly critical, they're
Mhm.
just not picking up on the message. And then they're like, I want you to do this because I really care about you. But then it's almost like you're crossing that line. I'm curious, what have you seen when it comes to regards to that?
Yeah, Shad, that's a great question. So it's a mutual loving criticism. So if I don't feel comfortable giving you that back and you don't feel comfortable giving it to me, then it doesn't really exist. Right.
Mm, yep.
So I think that that's the key. So like if you think back in your life and think about some of the most important conversations that you've had with people that kind of impacted your trajectory, it was probably someone that had a difficult, quote, difficult conversation with you, addressed something, a way that you were thinking, something that you were doing, but they came from a place of care, and that changed your trajectory, or the way that you think. And so like, I can think about this, like my first boss at Gartner, she came from that place where I knew that she wanted me to get better, but she would call me out on my BS. And I could call her out on stuff that I knew that she wasn't doing. And it was just this mutual kind of loving, like we both wanted to get better and it was mutual. It's not a one-sided relationship. And
Right.
same thing in like, my, love life, personal relationship, my partner, she, and I just have this relationship where like we can call each other out on stuff, but it's not, but like, I'm so thankful when she does. So I'm sitting down today to do a podcast and she might call me out on, I don't know what it could be something, and what I'm doing from a prep perspective, it could be something outside of it, but I know that it's coming from a place where she cares, but I can also reciprocate that. And neither one of us look at that as you're nagging me or you're criticizing me. It's like, truly, I care about you, want you to get better. And I know that you want the same thing from me. So that mutual is the piece that I would look for when you're trying to figure out if you have it. Because to your point, the extreme criticism side, either way, there's not a mutual aspect, right? Because it's always, they're not looking to get better, or so internally focused that there's no way that you can get out of someone's head. So it's that reciprocal, that mutual loving criticism.
Yeah. And it's such a difficult type of relationship to find because it's often masked in some scenarios. But I think, like you were mentioning, those integral relationships, you always will wonder, why do some relationships have such a profound impact in my life, whereas others, they were great relationships, but they weren't that, out of this world type of relationship that you find in others. And I think like you hit the nail on the head when it's that mutual respect, that mutual loving, critical mindset of wanting to grow. So I love how you put that.
And not every relationship has to be that way too, right? You can have some fun ones where, you just hang out with friends, acquaintances, but when you find those, definitely hold on to the ones where you do have that. So,
And so the third and final question I have is, what's your own mantra or slogan for relationship management? And so for context, this podcast centers itself around the idea that we don't make relationships, but we make relationships better. So I'm curious, what would be your own mantra or slogan if you have one, or you can maybe create one on the spot? And we can even expand this to life in general at large as well.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's a slogan, but more of a process, or what I like a way of thinking. So the best example I can give is, and I don't know if you felt this way, but I find that when I use this example, a lot of people have the similar feeling where you're with your parents specifically, and you're as an adult, I'm talking about more so from an adult perspective. You haven't spent time with them in a while because, you're an adult, you're living your life. You don't see them as much, but you get to spend an inordinate amount of time with them. And after a while you snap, and your mom or your dad says something, and all of a sudden, like it just bugs you. Like you just get that feeling like you're really frustrated. And I noticed that I was having this feeling sometimes. Like I would just spend a lot of time with my mom over the holidays or something like that. And I would get frustrated for little things, no reason. And if it had been with someone else and it wasn't, a parent, I wouldn't have felt that way. And so what I try to do is, whenever I'm feeling frustrated with someone else or feeling challenged, is before I put blame on them, as I look internally and first kind of go through a checklist of, why am I feeling this way? What's causing this? And what would change my feeling? If this was another person, would I still react the same way? If this was a different, situation in general, is it only in this instance when, I'm with my girlfriend and we're talking about, cleaning, or, is it the same situation when we're talking about future plans? So I try to really analyze and psychoanalyze what is causing me to feel the frustration or anger or whatever the emotion is that I'm feeling. Because once I identify that, now I can really understand how to approach our relationship better. Because if it's just me and it's just I'm acting weird in this situation, then I know that I don't need to respond or lash out or whatever my normal reaction, just kind of reaction would be. So I think that is sort of my mantra, I guess, is to think internally first and foremost and go through that checklist try to understand why it is I'm feeling this way, what other situations would might change that or impact how I'm feeling, and focus internally first and foremost.
No, I love that process. That process is such a great way, I feel, to break down a lot of internal emotional responses, emotional triggers, whatever the term you want to say. But like you were mentioning, I think we often conflate the idea, like you were mentioning, is that this same action, the same stimulus is going to cause the same emotional reaction in me in another scenario. But in reality, that may not be the case. So maybe there's something specific to this relationship. Maybe there's a greater bond in this relationship that brings up that type of emotion because I care about you in such a way where that really bothers me. Or maybe it's a whole other different explanation. But always looking internally instead of at the other person. And like, I think the idea of not putting blame on someone else is the really kind of, I guess, the umbrella kind of mantra you can think of in terms of how this process works. So I think that's such a great way, because then it goes back to, I guess, the first and second question where you aren't extremely critical of others. You're always looking to grow internally first, and then you're trying to help be lovingly critical of other people, but you were first lovingly critical of yourself. And I think that kind of ties in the first two questions really well with this last question when it comes to your process.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great observation, Shad. You kind of broke down that from a psychoanalytic perspective there. Yeah, absolutely. It's the internal first and foremost, and that allows you to operate from a place where you want to operate versus just being reactionary, which we all have reactions. And, when I started doing that, I noticed that I stopped feeling that way when I was with my parents or with, and again, it was something like, I can't even tell you, like, it would literally be like we were watching TV and like something dumb, like literally said one comment that had absolutely like nothing relevant to like what we were watching. And that would be what frustrated me. It wasn't like these big things, and it's like, why am I feeling this way over this small comment? But as soon as I started doing that, I would still initially get those, but now over time, having practiced this for a number of years, I no longer get that kind of urge, and I can enjoy spending time with the people that I love and care about more. And I think to your point, there was you mentioned that there's a care aspect. And I think that that's where that kind of frustration comes from, because you have expectations in a relationship. Whereas if it was a stranger, I'm not going to see that person again. So it doesn't really bother me what they say or what they do, or if this relationship gets better or worse, because I'm never going to see them again. So.
Yeah, I think this segment was such a great way to kind of tie everything together in terms of doing that self-assessment work. When it really comes down to everything, when it comes to financial well-being and just relationships at large, is doing that self-assessment work and always thinking internally, where am I coming from in this situation? So where am I coming from when it comes to my relationship with my parents, with my partner? What causes this response in me? And then going back to the topic of this episode, when it comes to your personal finances, what causes me to want to spend money on, ice cream, like the example you were mentioning earlier? What's the catalyst for me spending so much on ice cream? And then you're able to then lovingly be critical of yourself. You're like, oh, this is what causes this. Maybe I'm not feeling emotionally in a good state. I'm kind of feeling in a negative emotion. And as a result, that's what causes me to buy ice cream. And so I take a step back. What causes me to get into that state? What are the environmental factors, the social factors? And maybe those factors are something that I can reorient for myself to develop a more well state of mind that can then improve your finances, and then at large, improve your relationships. So, I know Ostrich definitely does all of this in terms of reinforcing the habits when it comes to this entire self-assessment work. And so, this has been a great conversation. Well, I think the folks who are listening or viewing this podcast right now, they're going to be able to take away so many different tangible steps to helping improve their personal financial situation, but at the same time, just their relationships and life at large. And so, I want to leave some time here at the end for you to kind of, if individuals are interested in learning more about you, learning more about Ostrich, getting connected with you, how can they get best connected with you and the Ostrich platform?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shad. And I think before I jump into that, I'd love to, it sounds like you've done some thinking about your own kind of financial well-being and your own kind of relationship with money. I'd love if you wouldn't mind sharing with the audience kind of your perspective on that and how you view your own relationship. I know we talked a lot about me, but I'd love to hear that. I think that would add a lot of value to the conversation.
Yeah, for me personally, I was always kind of growing up. My parents are both immigrants, so they definitely didn't have a lot of money growing up, and they were always thinking about myself and my younger brother, providing for us and giving us such a great future. And so I think when I first got exposed to money, I was a very happy, jolly kind of kid. So it was just immediately, like you were mentioning, money comes in. Oh, I'm gonna spend it because I want, the toys. I was always that kid that wanted the toys. I remember my dad would mention when we went to Toys R Us once, and like I was like, I want this bike or something, and he's like, no, we'll get it another time, not today, or something, to kind of just basically say no. And then I was like on the floor or crying and like, out of control. My dad's like, you caused a huge, scene at Toys R Us when you were younger. And now, having grown up, I kind of shifted my mindset, because once I got a steady paycheck and everything, I started thinking, oh, I want to be careful, because I don't want to get into the same situation my parents were in, where you're scrapping for every little dollar. You want to be able to provide for your future, and also taking care of my parents and looking after family in the future that hopefully will happen. So I went into kind of a scarcity mindset. And so it was kind of like I went on the opposite sides of the spectrum, like ping pong. And now it's more so, okay, you know what? That isn't a healthy way either. You need to have some sort of balance, like you were mentioning. And so I started thinking, doing that self-assessment, where do I want to go in the future? And I think a lot of it does stem from having a sense of control over what it is your path is going to look like. So some more creative entrepreneurial endeavors. So like, say, for instance, with this podcast and other digital mediums that I've explored. And at first I was very hesitant, because one is the self-critical nature that I had in terms of, oh, I can't do any of this. But then the second component to that was, okay, I want to do this well. I want to be accountable for myself. And then I thought, oh, this stuff costs some money. There's a pretty big investment that has to go into this. But then I immediately thought to myself, I want to do this. Like, this is the type of stuff that brings me fulfillment, and I want to explore different areas of myself that I've never explored previously to this moment. And so I thought that was a simple decision. I wanted to make the investments. I no longer thought, I'm never going to see this money. Am I going to stick with this? So being able to find those values, like you were mentioning, and just generally having a sense of self-confidence, that was something that I think I was able to develop, especially over this last year. And I think I've been getting closer to this idea of, having a better balance when it comes to finances. So that's kind of my own journey when it comes to financial well-being.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that's a great example of how financial well-being isn't it's not just about the money, right? It's about, you made the decision to invest in the podcast, and it's something that brings you joy and fulfillment. And it's, I say financial well-being, but if you dropped the financial, like we're improving well-being.
Right.
And so that's when I think about the vision and the true impact. We're focusing on the financial piece because I think that, as you said, from a priority perspective, where you spend your money, how you think, that is reflected in our finances. That's I love your story. So thanks for sharing, Shad.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. It's definitely, I think as more of us can share these stories and the journeys like you've been able to share with us today, Will, this just helps people feel liberated to do just the same. Because I know I was in the boat where, and I'm sure you would say the same, where you were scared to make these investments, you were scared to take these leaps into the unknown when it comes to your finances, but more so just life in general. And by being able to then see others do it, they inspire you. You then do the self-assessment work. You then take on that same exact experience. And then you are able to hopefully inspire someone else who has the exact same thought, being in the exact same shoes as you were, just a couple months, years, whatever the case may be. It's just you're just continuing the human progression. And I think that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
Exactly. And I love the message of the podcast and what you've put together here, especially around relationships, because I think that's something that no matter what you're talking about, personal relationships, you're talking about work, you're talking about finances, whatever it is, reaching out to, as you said, people that have been there, that have done that. There's just we are social beings and people want to give back. Like, think about how exciting it is when someone younger than you or a friend like asks you for advice. Like, you want to give advice, you want to be helpful. And we all have this sort of innate desire. So I think that that's a really great point that you brought up about, there's other people that have done this. Reach out to them, talk to those people because they're willing to help. And that goes for me as well. So feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in, learning about finances, financial well-being, entrepreneurship, podcasting, whatever it is. I'm happy to share.
Yeah, definitely. So I will, be linking down in the description below, the show notes or the description if you're watching this podcast right now, links to the Ostrich app, the Ostrich website, Will's own personal social media if you wanted to get further connected with him and learning more about his journey when it comes to finances, entrepreneurship, anything at large. I'll definitely be linking all that down below for folks to get connected and with both Ostrich and you, Will. And so I wanted to leave this moment here at the end also for any lasting messages you wanted to leave before we sign off today.
Yeah. So those links will be in the show notes. You can go to getostrich.com if you want to go learn more about the company. And then also there's a button to download the app. So we're on iOS and Android. Follow us at the Ostrich app. So THE Ostrich app on all the social media platforms. And if you want to send me an email, it's william@theostrichapp.com. And I'm happy to chat. And I think in terms of a last message, I think it would be to just take one action from today. If you've made it to the end of this podcast, then you probably found value in something. So whatever that value nugget is or was for you, go take action on it, whether it's in your relationships or it's in your finances. Just go take some action today. Don't end up in that analysis paralysis. I've been there. It's easy to get stuck in that consumption of podcasts and other content. Definitely continue to consume those, but also take action.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Will, for coming on to the podcast today. I really appreciate everything.
Yeah, thanks, Shad. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you having me on, and I'm really, really excited to see where you take this platform.
Hey everyone, my name is Shadman Rahman, and thanks for tuning in to my YouTube channel today. I hope you found this episode of the Between Us podcast enjoyable, and that you're walking away feeling entertained, inspired, and/or motivated. If you particularly enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and smash the like button down below and leave your thoughts in the comments section. And if you'd like to go ahead and keep up with the podcast, go ahead and follow our social media. And please go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, so that way you can find out about new episodes as soon as they're released. Until next time, everyone, take care, and we'll see you all in the next episode.